The Appalachian Mountains are home to some of the most chilling and unexplained events in American history. From eerie lights in the sky to unexplainable creatures lurking in the shadows, these mountains hold secrets that have haunted generations. Tonight, you'll hear the real full stories behind some of the most terrifying events ever recorded in this region. Events that have left people wondering what really lurks in the dark corners of these hills. Get ready for a journey into the unknown. These are the 10 scariest Appalachian Mountains horror stories. The Mothman. It was a night like any other in Point Pleasant, West Virginia, except for the eerie stillness in the air. The fog hung thick over the town, settling on every roof, every street. The usual sounds of the night, dogs barking, owls hooting, were absent, replaced by an unnatural silence. And in that silence, something stirred. It was an autumn evening in 1966 when people first noticed the figure. At first, just a shadow, a distant shape looming in the fog. A couple out for a drive had seen it near the TNT area, an abandoned munitions site on the outskirts of town. But what they saw wasn't a man. It wasn't even a bird. It was something otherworldly. Its body was human-like, but too large, too unnatural, with wings that seemed to stretch beyond reason, its black feathers shimmering in the dim light, reflecting the moon like a shadow moving through the air. And those eyes, glowing, unblinking red, locking onto them with a predatory gaze that chilled them to the bone. They sped off, terrified, but the creature seemed to follow. It wasn't just a sighting. It was something more, something that marked them, something that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. And soon, it wasn't just one couple. Reports began flooding in, from fishermen, from hunters, from travelers. Everyone who saw it described the same terrifying figure, a humanoid creature with massive wings and eyes that seemed to glow with an unnatural red light. The Mothman was real, but what did it want? The fear grew, and with it, the sense that something terrible was about to happen. People began to see the creature more frequently, and each sighting seemed to bring a greater sense of dread. The air grew heavier, and it felt as though the very land was steeped in an ominous weight. Some believed the Mothman was a harbinger, a warning of disaster. But it wasn't until December 15, 1967, that the town realized the truth behind the creature's presence. On that fateful day, the Silver Bridge, a vital link between Point Pleasant and Ohio, collapsed during rush hour, sending cars plummeting into the icy river below. 46 people died. As the bridge crumbled, several witnesses swore they saw the Mothman perched on the bridge, its glowing eyes watching the destruction unfold. Was it the cause, a catalyst for the tragedy, or simply a witness to it? Those who survived the collapse never forgot the eyes of the creature watching from above, their terror imprinted in their minds forever. And yet, after that day, the Mothman seemed to vanish, disappearing into the mist as mysteriously as it had appeared. The sighting slowed, but the fear remained. It lingered in the hearts of those who lived through it, the fear that the Mothman hadn't left but was simply waiting for the next disaster. Waiting for the next moment when it would emerge from the fog, its wings spread wide, its red eyes burning with the knowledge of what was yet to come. Even today, when the fog rolls in thick and the night grows quiet, some say they can still feel the Mothman's presence, lingering just beyond the trees, watching from the shadows. The Bell Witch haunting. It began quietly enough. In 1817, the Bell family settled in a modest log cabin in the wilds of Tennessee, far removed from the hustle and bustle of civilization. The land was fertile, the air fresh, and life seemed simple. But there was something wrong with the land, something lurking just beyond the horizon, waiting for the Bell family to unknowingly stir it awake. At first, it was just whispers, a strange rustling in the night, a tapping on the walls, an eerie knocking sound. But the family paid it no mind. Every house makes noises. Perhaps it was just the wind, the house settling. But as the days passed, the knocks grew louder, more persistent. And then came the voices. The voice was low, raspy, like a whisper from the grave. But it didn't belong to anyone in the family. It spoke to them, mocked them, taunted them. It knew things it should not have known. The family's first real encounter with the supernatural happened when the voice called out to John Bell, the father by name. It told him of his upcoming death. It spoke of the torment that awaited his family. The voice was not just a spirit, it was something malicious, something dark, but it wasn't just words. Soon physical disturbances followed. John Bell felt something unseen pressing down on his chest, suffocating him as he tried to sleep. His daughter Betsy became the next target. The invisible force would slap her, push her, and even tear at her hair. Her screams echoed through the house as the unseen entity battered her body with a force that left visible marks. Neighbors soon began hearing the strange noises, and some came to visit the Bell family, only to find themselves drawn into the terror. One witness, James Johnston, described feeling as though something was watching him, though no one was there. The entity, whatever it was, seemed to feed off their fear, growing stronger with each passing night. It mocked their prayers, it laughed at their attempts to rid the house of it, and it began to take on a voice that promised death. But it was John Bell who became its primary victim. His health deteriorated rapidly, as if the very life force was being drained from him. The Bell Witch would appear by his bedside, whispering dark prophecies, mocking him with every breath. On December 20th, 1820, John Bell died under mysterious circumstances. Some say it was poison, administered by the Bell Witch herself. Others believed it was the curse that had been placed upon him, his body simply succumbing to the malevolent force. Even after his death, the terror didn't stop. The Bell Witch continued to torment the family, but it also began to haunt the land itself. The whispers, the laughter, the voices, every night they would return. Visitors who came seeking answers often left with more questions and a deep, lingering sense of dread. The Bell Witch was no mere ghost. It was a force, a spirit of vengeance that sought to destroy. To this day, the Bell Witch is considered one of the most terrifying hauntings in American folklore. And though the Bell family no longer lives in the cabin, many claim that the land is cursed. Those who visit the area at night speak of hearing strange sounds, seeing lights flicker in the distance, or feeling an icy cold hand on their shoulder when no one is around. Some believe the Bell Witch still roams the woods, waiting for the next family, the next victim, to awaken its wrath. For centuries, people have been mystified by the strange lights that appear over Brown Mountain in North Carolina. The lights are an enigma, a phenomenon that defies explanation. But for those who live nearby, the lights are something far more terrifying. The lights first appeared in the late 1800s, when early settlers began to notice them glowing on the mountain at night. At first, they were dismissed as campfires or lanterns, perhaps the lights of miners or travelers. But no one could ever find the source. The lights flickered, danced, and sometimes seemed to move across the sky, glowing brighter and then fading into the darkness. They would appear and disappear without warning, often in patterns that didn't make sense. They were unlike any natural light and no one could explain them. As the years passed, stories began to circulate. Some said the lights were the spirits of Native American women, whose husbands had died in battle. Others believed the lights were the souls of slaves who had perished while trying to escape to freedom. But the most chilling explanation was that the lights were not just the souls of the dead, they were something far darker. People who ventured too close to the lights often reported an overwhelming sense of dread, a feeling that they were being watched. Some heard whispers on the wind, voices calling their names. Others claimed the lights seemed to follow them, moving just ahead, always out of reach. But those who dared venture too far never returned. They were swallowed by the darkness of the mountain, their fates unknown. The lights became more than just an oddity. They became a warning. Some believed that if you saw the lights, disaster would soon follow. One story tells of a family who, after seeing the lights one fateful night, lost their home to a terrible fire. Another tale speaks of a man who, after seeing the lights, disappeared, never to be heard from again. And still, the lights continue to appear, flickering across the mountain, silent and ominous. No one knows what they are, but everyone knows the feeling they bring. The feeling that something is waiting in the shadows, watching from the darkness. The year 1952 in Flatwoods, West Virginia started off like any other, but what happened one evening would change everything for the small, sleepy town forever. A group of local children, including two young boys named Edward and Fred May, along with some adults, witnessed an unusual light streak across the sky. It wasn't like anything they had ever seen, a flash of light that darted erratically, behaving unlike any aircraft or meteor. The light vanished behind a nearby hill, leaving the group of onlookers bewildered. Intrigued and eager to learn the source of the strange event, they decided to follow the trail. Led by the two young boys, the group climbed the hill, hoping to discover the origin of the mysterious glow. The air was thick with anticipation, but also with something darker, something not right. As they reached the crest of the hill and peered down into the valley below, they saw a figure standing at the edge of the woods, its outline barely discernible in the fading light. But as they stared, the shape became clearer, and their blood ran cold. Running as fast as they could. Despite their haste, the terror of what they had witnessed clung to them like a shadow. They managed to return to the town, but the experience had left them shaken. The adults tried to rationalize the event, but nothing could erase the fear that had taken root in their minds. When they returned the next day to search the area where they had seen the creature, they found no evidence. No footprints, no trace of the monster. It was as though it had never been there at all. But the fear didn't stop there. In the days following the encounter, some members of the group began to suffer strange physical symptoms, severe headaches, nausea, and dizziness. Others experienced a peculiar sensation of paralysis, as if an unseen force had held them in place. Those who had witnessed the creature could not shake the feeling that something dark and malevolent had attached itself to them. In the years that followed, the Flatwoods monster would continue to haunt the town's history. Despite occasional sightings of strange lights and unexplainable phenomena, the mystery of the creature remained unsolved. Some believe it was an extraterrestrial being, while others theorize it was the result of a secret government experiment. Whatever the truth may be, the terror of that night left a permanent mark on the town, and the legend of the Flatwoods monster persists to this day. The fear felt by those who witnessed the creature, along with the eerie silence that often followed its appearance, became a part of the town's lore. Over the years, local residents have shared their own encounters, some claiming to have heard strange noises in the woods, others reporting flickering lights in the sky. Each account only deepened the mystery, and Flatwoods became known as a place where something far beyond human understanding had made its home. Some of the more chilling reports came from those who ventured into the woods in search of answers. One night, a group of teenagers, skeptical of the legend, decided to see if they could catch a glimpse of the creature for themselves. Armed with flashlights and cameras, they ventured deep into the forest, only to find themselves caught in a thick fog. The further they went, the more they felt the weight of the woods pressing in on them, as though they were being watched by unseen eyes. Suddenly, the unmistakable screeching noise pierced the air, sending them running in all directions. One of the teenagers, a young woman named Laura, claimed to have seen the creature's glowing eyes staring at her through the mist. She said it was like staring into the depths of a dark abyss, a void that pulled at her very soul. Her heart raced, and she could barely breathe as the air seemed to grow thick and oppressive. The group eventually managed to find their way back to town, but they were never the same. Each of them, in their own way, had been marked by the encounter. The town of Flatwoods would never fully recover from the experience, and the legend of the Flatwoods monster would become woven into the fabric of local folklore. It was a night steeped in darkness when the Wampus Cat first began to make her presence known. According to Cherokee legend, the Wampus Cat was once a young woman, curious and daring, traits that would lead her down a path from which she would never return. Her curiosity wasn't of the harmless variety though, it was born of envy and defiance. She had overheard the Cherokee men talking in hushed voices one evening, speaking of a sacred ritual that would grant them powerful spiritual insight. But this wasn't just any ceremony. It was one that had been kept secret from women, a privilege reserved only for the men of their tribe. She was determined to know what they were up to. So, in the dead of night, when the men were preparing for their ritual in the deep woods, she followed them, creeping silently between the trees. The farther she ventured into the forest, the more the air seemed to thicken, as though something ancient and powerful was stirring. The girl, however, was too focused on her goal to notice. She pushed through the underbrush and eventually found herself at the heart of the ritual. But what she saw was more than she could comprehend. Men chanting in a circle, smoke rising from a fire, their voices carrying the weight of something far greater than mere human desire. As she watched, hidden in the shadows, something deep within her stirred. The energy of the ceremony seemed to pull at her, tempting her to join, to understand what they had been keeping from her. But just as she made a move to approach, the men sensed her presence, their eyes snapping to the trees where she had been watching them. In that moment, the men did not yell or call for her to leave. Instead, they spoke in words that carried the weight of an ancient curse. Her curiosity had cost her dearly. The men, in their wisdom, decided to punish her not with death, but with something far worse. They called upon the spirits, and the air around her shifted. She screamed in terror as the very earth seemed to rise up against her, transforming her body in a way no mortal should endure. The curse took hold. Her legs twisted, reshaped, turned into the limbs of a wild animal. Her senses sharpened, her mind twisted into a frenzy. She was no longer a human woman, she was something else, a creature born from fear and punishment. The Wampus Cat had been born. With glowing yellow eyes, she now prowled the woods, a predator of the night. Her appearance was both human and beast, a monstrous amalgamation of two worlds. And her hunger, both for revenge and for survival, was insatiable. She hunted the forests of the Appalachian Mountains, her sharp eyes glowing in the moonlight, her low growl echoing through the trees. The legend of the Wampus Cat spread, and to this day people who venture too deep into the Appalachian wilderness at night speak of her eerie scream, followed by the rustling of leaves and the soft, haunting echo of footsteps that shouldn't be there. Local hunters tell of encounters with her in the dense forests, where their flashlights would catch a glimpse of her, her haunting eyes glowing in the darkness, her body poised like an animal ready to strike. One of the more chilling tales comes from a family living on the outskirts of a small town in Tennessee. One night, they were startled by a loud crashing sound outside their cabin. Thinking it was a bear or some other animal, they armed themselves and ventured outside. But what they saw was beyond imagination. The Wampus Cat stood before them, her eyes locked onto theirs, glowing like two molten orbs. Her growl was unlike anything they'd ever heard, deep and guttural, sending a chill straight through their bones. The family froze, unable to move. The creature didn't approach them, but its presence alone was enough to paralyze them with fear. Then, just as quickly as it had appeared, the Wampus Cat disappeared back into the forest, vanishing into the shadows. Some say that the Wampus Cat still haunts the Appalachian Mountains to this day, her cries carried on the wind. Others claim she waits for those who dare to encroach on her territory, stalking them from the darkness with her glowing eyes. Her legend is as old as the hills themselves, and yet the terror she instills remains as fresh as ever. Long before the Cherokee arrived in the Appalachian Mountains, whispers surrounded the region's dense forests. A mysterious tribe known only as the Moon-Eyed People lived in seclusion, hidden from the eyes of outsiders. These enigmatic people were different from any other tribe the Cherokee had encountered. Their features were strange, with pale, almost translucent skin and large, unblinking eyes. Their eyes were not ordinary by any means. They could not see in daylight, but their vision was extraordinary when night fell. They relied on the moonlight to navigate the vast, dark forests, their luminous eyes glowing in the dark like ethereal lanterns. The Moon-Eyed People's story has been passed down through generations, but even now, no one truly knows what happened to them. Some say they were an ancient race from another time, one that had long since disappeared from the world. The Cherokee, upon encountering them, were intrigued but also afraid. The Moon-Eyed People were unlike anything they had ever seen. Their strange, pale faces and large, glowing eyes left an impression, and their mannerisms were equally unsettling. Despite the curiosity, tensions began to grow between the two groups, and soon, a conflict began to brew. As the legend goes, the Cherokee learned that the Moon-Eyed People lived in caves deep within the Appalachian wilderness. These caves were said to be their sacred homes, and the people never ventured outside unless under the cover of night. But something happened, whether it was a battle or a curse, remains unclear. The Moon-Eyed People were eventually driven deep into the mountains, where they faded into myth. Some accounts suggest the Cherokee forced them further into the wilderness, while others say that the Moon-Eyed People vanished without a trace, leaving behind only faint whispers of their existence. Even so, the legacy of the Moon-Eyed People lingered. Strange symbols and markings began to surface in the caves. These symbols were unlike anything the Cherokee or any other tribe had seen, suggesting that the Moon-Eyed People had their own unique language and culture. As settlers began to pour into the Appalachian Mountains, they stumbled upon these caves, and some claimed to have seen the strange symbols still glowing faintly in the darkness, as if the people had never truly left. In the 19th century, a group of explorers set out to uncover the truth about the Moon-Eyed People. Led by a man named William Roberts, the group ventured deep into the Appalachian wilderness, determined to find the fabled caves where the Moon-Eyed People had once lived. They traveled for days, cutting their way through thick forests and rugged terrain, before finally stumbling upon a cave entrance hidden behind a waterfall. The cave was dark, almost oppressively so, and the deeper they ventured, the stranger it became. The walls were covered in symbols, and strange glowing lights flickered in the distance. As they ventured deeper into the heart of the cave, the explorers began to hear something, a whispering sound like voices speaking in an ancient language. The air grew colder, and the further they moved into the cave, the more they felt a sense of dread. One by one, the explorers started to feel as though they were being watched, their every movement scrutinized by unseen eyes. It was said that the last man who dared to explore the deepest recesses of the cave never returned, and those who fled the cave later spoke of strange, luminous eyes following them from the darkness. Locals near the cave site still speak of the strange occurrences. People who venture too close to the cave claim to feel the unsettling presence of the Moon-Eyed People. Some report hearing soft whispers in the night, while others claim to see faint glowing eyes peering from the darkness. The legend lives on in the shadows of the mountains, a reminder of a people who vanished without a trace but left their mark on the land forever. It was a chilly, fog-laden night in 1891 when the number 9 train made its fateful journey toward the Bostian Bridge in North Carolina. As it barreled through the fog, the train seemed to slice through the eerie silence of the Appalachian Mountains. The passengers were unaware of the doom that awaited them just beyond the mist. The engineer, too, likely didn't see the disaster coming as the train careened off the tracks and fell into the ravine below. A dozen souls perished in an instant, their lives extinguished before their final stop could be reached. What followed the crash wasn't just grief, it was the beginning of an unexplainable phenomenon that still haunts the region to this day. The first whispers of a ghostly presence began to circulate. Local townspeople reported hearing the distant, mournful whistle of a steam engine in the dead of night. But when they ventured to the site, nothing could be found. No signs of a train, no remnants of the wreckage that had been cleared long ago. Just the unsettling sound of a train's whistle echoing through the night air, but there was no train in sight. For months, and then years, the whispers spread like wildfire. People claimed they could hear the unmistakable sound of wheels grinding on metal, the piercing whistle of a steam engine, and the faint but unmistakable rumble of an approaching train. Some even claimed to see faint, flickering lights crossing the bridge, ghostly headlights illuminating the fog, but when they looked closer, the train would vanish as if swallowed by the mist. The legend of the ghost train grew, but so too did the dread that it brought. What was happening? Was it a residual energy from the tragedy, or was something more sinister at work? As the years passed, more and more people began to venture to the site on the anniversary of the crash, hoping to witness the strange phenomenon for themselves. The most famous incident occurred in 1927, when a group of young, adventurous locals decided to investigate the bridge on a dark, foggy night. Armed with lanterns and an overwhelming sense of courage, they made their way to Bostian Bridge, hoping to catch a glimpse of the elusive ghost train. They weren't sure what to expect. Stories varied, some saying they'd hear only the whistle, others claiming to see the full shadowy form of the train. As they arrived at the bridge, the air grew thick with fog, making the night feel unnaturally still. The sound of their footsteps was muffled, and the darkness seemed to swallow them whole. The group had no idea that the events that would unfold would be enough to freeze them in their tracks. At first they heard nothing. Silence. For several minutes the group stood at the edge of the bridge, their lanterns casting shaky warm light into the thick fog, waiting, watching. And then, just as they were about to give up and laugh off their worries, they heard it. The unmistakable sound of a train whistle, faint at first but growing louder. The air around them seemed to grow colder, and the ground began to tremble beneath their feet. The sound of wheels on metal screeching against the tracks followed, sending a chill down their spines. Their hearts raced. The sound wasn't imagined, it was real. Suddenly, the fog parted slightly, and they saw it. A shadow, faint at first but quickly becoming more distinct, materializing before their eyes. The ghostly outline of a train began to take shape, moving across the bridge at an alarming speed. Its form was translucent, flickering as if it were only half real, but the whistle and the screeching of the wheels were undeniably present. The train seemed to glide effortlessly through the mist, its headlights flashing, its form almost spectral, as though it was trapped between worlds. But just as quickly as it had appeared, the train vanished into the fog, leaving nothing but silence and an overwhelming sense of dread behind. The group stood frozen, wide-eyed, unsure of what they had just witnessed. They immediately fled the bridge, their hearts pounding in their chests, unable to comprehend what had just occurred. The memory of that night haunted them forever. What they had experienced wasn't just a strange occurrence, it was a full-on, paranormal event, one that defied logic and reason. The ghost train had shown itself, and now they too were part of the legend. In the years that followed, more and more witnesses reported hearing the phantom train. On the anniversary of the crash, the sound of the whistle could be heard in the distance, growing louder as the night wore on. Some even claimed to see the flickering headlights of the train crossing the bridge, just as the group had. But for those brave enough to approach, the train was always gone by the time they arrived. The eerie sounds would fade into the night as if the train were never really there, a spectral apparition that existed only in the memory of those who dared to witness it. But was the ghost train merely a manifestation of the grief and trauma of the crash? Or was it something darker? Some locals claim that the spirits of the victims are trapped, forever bound to the site of their death, forced to relive their tragic end. Others believe the train is a harbinger of bad luck, a warning for those who might dare to venture too close to the bridge. Some say the train is simply a ghostly echo of the past, repeating the events of that fateful night over and over again, like a broken record. In any case, the Bostian Bridge remains a site of mystery and terror to this day. Each year on the anniversary of the crash, locals gather in groups, hoping to hear the phantom whistle, or perhaps even see the elusive train. Some come seeking answers, while others are content simply to witness the phenomenon and add their own story to the growing legend. Regardless of the truth, the ghost train has become a part of the Appalachian landscape, a chilling reminder of the disaster that took place there and the souls that may never rest. In the years since the first sightings, the legend of the ghost train has continued to grow, and it's clear that the Bostian Bridge is far more than just a historic site. It's a portal to the past, one that seems to trap the memories of those who perished in the crash, forever doomed to ride the rails of the afterlife. Whether the train's appearances are simply an eerie coincidence, or the result of something much darker, one thing is certain. The ghost train of Bostian Bridge will continue to haunt the area, its whistle cutting through the night air for years to come. The sun set slowly behind the rolling hills of rural Texas in the early 1900s. The once bustling town of Crockett, which had once thrived with life and laughter, had grown quieter over the years. As the years passed, fewer families stayed in the small town and the isolation began to breed strange, disturbing rumors. But nothing was more unsettling than the tales whispered in hushed tones. Stories of a mysterious woman who roamed the countryside, luring children with candy and vanishing with them into the night. She was known only as the Candy Lady, and her legend would become the stuff of nightmares for generations. The first child to disappear was young Lucy Whitley. A bright-eyed, curious girl of 8, she lived on a small farm with her parents just outside the town. On the evening she vanished, Lucy had been playing near the woods that bordered her family's property. As the sun dipped below the horizon, she had wandered farther than she ever had before, following a trail of colorful wildflowers into the trees. Her parents had called for her, but when they reached the edge of the woods, there was no sign of their little girl. A search party was quickly organized, but no one could find any trace of Lucy. The more people searched, the more the whispers began. The townsfolk started to mention the Candy Lady, an eerie figure who had been seen walking the roads with a basket filled with sweets, offering them to children in exchange for their company. No one knew where she came from or where she went, but there were unsettling rumors about her appearance. She was described as tall and gaunt, with a long, pale face and dark eyes that seemed to pierce through anyone she looked at. She wore a plain dress that seemed to flow unnaturally as she walked, and her smile, though sweet, was cold and unnerving. Days turned into weeks, and there was no sign of Lucy. The entire town was on edge. Parents held their children close, afraid to let them out of their sight. Despite the fear, the strange disappearances continued. Over the next few months, 2 more children vanished without a trace. One of them, a boy named William Ferguson, had been seen playing near the old cotton mill when he was last spotted. His friends claimed that they had seen him talking to a woman who had offered him candy. After that, he was never seen again. By the time the 3rd child disappeared, the fear had escalated into terror. The townspeople were certain the Candy Lady was responsible for the disappearances. A sense of dread hung thick in the air, and no one knew where to turn. There were rumors that the Candy Lady wasn't human at all, but a vengeful spirit cursed to roam the earth. Some believed she had once been a woman who had lost her own children to disease, and in her grief, she had turned to a dark, supernatural force to replace them. Others whispered that she had made a deal with the devil himself, trading her soul for the ability to lure children away with candy, feeding off their innocence and their fear. But the more children that went missing, the more the legend grew, becoming a twisted, terrifying tale that the people of Crockett couldn't shake. One night, a group of brave, or perhaps foolish parents decided to confront the Candy Lady. Armed with lanterns and courage born of desperation, they ventured into the woods where the children had last been seen. They searched for hours, calling out for their missing sons and daughters, but there was no answer. Then, just as they were about to give up, one of the men, David Grant, a local farmer, heard a faint giggling coming from deep within the trees. He called out to the others, and they followed him toward the sound. The air grew colder as they ventured further into the woods. The leaves crunched beneath their feet, and the silence became deafening. It was as though the forest itself was holding its breath. Suddenly, they saw it, a pale figure standing in the clearing ahead. The woman was holding a basket filled with colorful candy, and her cold, dark eyes glowed faintly in the moonlight. The group froze, a sense of dread washing over them. The Candy Lady was real, standing before them like a ghost from their darkest nightmares. Her smile was unsettling, stretching across her face in a way that didn't seem entirely natural. "What do you want?" David shouted, his voice trembling. The Candy Lady didn't respond immediately. Instead, she simply stood there, holding out the basket of candy, offering it to them with an eerie calm. The parents stepped back, horrified by her unearthly presence. Then she spoke in a voice that seemed to come from all around them, soft and melodic, yet laced with an undeniable malevolence. "Take a piece," she said. "It's all I have to offer." One of the parents, a woman named Clara, stepped forward, trying to show bravery for her child's sake. "Where are our children?" she demanded, her voice shaking with both fear and anger. The Candy Lady's smile faded slightly, but her eyes grew colder, more intense. "You will never see them again," she said quietly, "but they will always remember me." The words sent a shiver down Clara's spine, and she suddenly realized just how dangerous this woman was. There was something unnatural about her, something wrong. She wasn't simply a figure to be feared, she was something far darker, something that preyed on the very essence of innocence and childhood. Before anyone could react, the Candy Lady vanished into the woods, as if she had melted into the shadows themselves. The group searched frantically, but found nothing. The feeling of her presence lingered in the air like a heavy fog, and it took hours before the parents could bring themselves to leave the woods. That night, Clara's daughter Emily came to her mother in a panic, claiming she had seen a woman in the dark, offering her candy. The girl was trembling, her eyes wide with fear. But Clara couldn't protect her child. She could only hold her close and pray that the Candy Lady wouldn't return. The disappearances continued, and with each child that vanished, the legend of the Candy Lady grew darker and more sinister. People began to avoid the woods entirely, refusing to even speak of her name. Those who had dared to confront her were never the same again. The fear had seeped into their bones, and they could never quite shake the feeling that the Candy Lady was always lurking just beyond the reach of the light. As the years went by, the stories faded, and the town of Crockett moved on. The disappearances stopped, and the mysterious Candy Lady became little more than a tale to frighten children. But every so often, a traveler passing through the woods would swear they saw a pale woman standing by the road, her basket of candy swinging gently in the wind. And though no one had seen her for years, the legend remained, forever intertwined with the town of Crockett, Texas, and the missing children who had never returned. The Candy Lady, whether she was real or not, had become a part of Texas folklore, a haunting reminder of the unknown that lurks just beyond the edges of reality. And so, the tale was passed down through generations, keeping the fear alive. It was a story mothers told their children to keep them safe at night. A story of a dark figure who would offer candy and take away everything precious in return. There are some stories that, no matter how many times they are told, seem to grow in horror with each passing year. The legend of the Bunnyman is one of those stories, a tale born of fear, confusion, and a dark sense of humor. Yet underneath it all, there's something unsettling that still chills the blood. It all began in Fairfax County, Virginia, in the mid-1970s. The town, nestled just outside the bustle of Washington, D.C., was nothing extraordinary, an average suburban area that could easily be overlooked in favor of the nearby cities. But over the years, this peaceful neighborhood became the setting for something horrific. Something that would never fully leave the minds of those who had the misfortune to cross its path. The first sightings of the Bunnyman occurred around Halloween, though there are conflicting accounts of exactly when the events began. What remained consistent in every version of the story was the figure, a man dressed in a strange, unsettling bunny costume, holding an axe, and attacking people with it. The first victims were two young lovers who were parked in their car near a remote bridge. The night was quiet, perhaps too quiet. But as the couple enjoyed their evening in isolation, the calm was shattered by a frantic knocking on the car window. Startled, the couple looked out to see a man standing in the darkness. He was wearing a shabby bunny costume, tattered and stained. But what truly terrified them was not the ridiculousness of the costume, but the man's face, pale, cold, and completely devoid of emotion. He wasn't looking for a laugh or a joke. No, there was something darker in his eyes, something that sent a chill down the spine of the young couple. Before they could react, the man raised an axe and swung it at their car. For weeks, the town was on edge. The local police could not explain the attacks, and the sightings continued to pour in. But then came the most chilling discovery. A group of teenagers, daring each other to explore the abandoned, dilapidated house near the bridge, came across something that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. As they wandered through the decaying structure, they found the room that seemed to have been untouched by time. There, hanging on the wall, were dozens of photographs, some black and white, others faded and torn, of people in the same strange bunny costume. And in every single photo, the figures were holding axes, standing in front of what appeared to be the same house. It wasn't clear who had taken the photos or why, but one thing was certain: this was no ordinary person. From that moment on, the Bunnyman became an urban legend that gripped Fairfax County in fear. There were rumors that the Bunnyman had escaped from a nearby asylum, that he had once been a man wronged by the community, and that the costume was a symbol of his broken psyche. But no one really knew. The most terrifying part of the story was the unknown. Why did he dress as a bunny? Was it some strange obsession, or was it meant to mock the very idea of innocence? Over time, the Bunnyman legend began to grow. People in the area told stories of seeing him lurking in the shadows, watching from behind trees or parked cars, always just out of reach. Some claimed that they had seen him chasing them down at night, a figure in a dirty rabbit costume sprinting after them with terrifying speed, his axe raised high. And then, just as quickly as he had appeared, he would vanish back into the woods, leaving his victims shaken and terrified. Though many believed the Bunnyman was nothing more than an urban legend, there were still those who swore by the authenticity of the stories. Some claimed they had seen the man with their own eyes. Others believed he was responsible for strange occurrences in the area, such as the disappearance of several pets and the unexplained deaths of wild animals. No one truly knew the truth, but the eerie presence of the Bunnyman cast a long shadow over the region. And so, the legend lives on, the story told and retold to keep children inside at night and to remind everyone that sometimes the scariest monsters are the ones who wear masks of innocence, like a bunny costume, and wield deadly weapons hidden behind a smile. The Bunnyman may be gone from Fairfax County, but his legend remains, waiting to strike terror in anyone brave enough to venture near the bridge or the woods at night. Deep in the cold, snowy hills of Vermont, there lies a haunting story that many locals refuse to talk about. It's a tale so strange, so unsettling, that even the most hardened Vermonters can't help but shudder when it's mentioned. This is the story of the hibernating elderly, an eerie, cryptic legend that has perplexed the people of Vermont for generations. The legend dates back to the early 19th century, during one of the coldest winters on record. The snow fell relentlessly, burying the small town of Dorset in a blanket of white. The temperatures plunged to deadly lows, and the villagers feared the brutal winter would claim the lives of many. As the days turned to weeks, the town grew quieter, with fewer and fewer people venturing outside. But amidst the biting cold, a strange thing happened to the elderly residents of Dorset. It all started with the Fenwick family, who had lived in the area for generations. The patriarch of the family, Old Man Fenwick, had been a fixture of the town for as long as anyone could remember. He was known for his wisdom, and for his eccentric behavior. He was the kind of man who would tell tales of strange happenings in the town, of mysterious figures in the woods, and of odd rituals that had been practiced long before the modern settlers had arrived. But Old Man Fenwick's greatest secret was one that no one knew, at least not until that fateful winter. It was during this particularly harsh season that Old Man Fenwick and his wife Margaret began to show signs of strange behavior. They weren't the only ones. Other elderly residents in the town, too, began to exhibit unusual symptoms. The elderly would slowly retreat from their daily routines, avoiding the cold as much as possible and seeking solace indoors. But there was something far more alarming than simply staying inside during the freezing winter. One evening, a neighbor named Clara decided to visit the Fenwicks to check on them. She'd heard that Old Man Fenwick had not been seen for several days and was growing worried. When she arrived at their home, she knocked on the door, but there was no answer. She tried again, calling out, but still there was no response. Growing concerned, she stepped inside. The house was eerily quiet, and the fire had long since gone out. Clara made her way upstairs, where she found the Fenwicks in their bedroom, lying still in their bed. At first, Clara assumed they had simply fallen ill or passed away during the night. But when she approached their bed, she realized that something was horribly wrong. Their skin was pale, almost waxy, and their bodies were stiff, as though they had been frozen in place. She tried to shake them awake, but they didn't stir. Terrified, Clara ran to the doctor, and when he arrived, he performed a quick examination. To his astonishment, the Fenwicks' bodies showed no signs of decay. They were frozen, yet still alive. Their breathing was shallow, but they appeared to be in a deep, unshakable sleep. The doctor was baffled. No one had ever seen anything like it. And this was just the beginning. Over the next few days, more elderly residents of the town fell into a similar condition. Each one was found in their homes, motionless and unresponsive, but with no sign of death. They had all entered what appeared to be a state of suspended animation, their bodies preserved by some mysterious force that no one could explain. The town was filled with whispers. Was this some kind of ancient curse, a supernatural force, or was it the result of some bizarre, unknown medical condition? Desperate for answers, the townspeople turned to the town historian, who unearthed a long-forgotten legend. According to an ancient diary found in the town's archives, the settlers of Dorset had made a pact with the land, a pact to survive the harsh winters by hibernating. The legend spoke of an old tradition where the elderly would enter a deep, mystical sleep during the coldest months of winter, only to awaken when the thaw came. But the townspeople had long since forgotten this ancient practice. As the weeks went by, more and more of the elderly fell into this strange sleep, until the entire town was engulfed in fear. The children were forbidden from venturing outside and the streets grew eerily empty. Even the animals seemed to know something was wrong, avoiding the homes of the elderly and hiding in their dens. Eventually, the spring thaw arrived and the frozen bodies of the elderly began to stir, but something had changed. Their eyes were darker, their movements slower, and they had a hollow, almost otherworldly presence about them. It was as though the winter had taken something from them, something that they could never get back. The hibernating elderly of Vermont had returned, but they were not the same. Some said their souls had been stolen by the winter, others whispered that the strange sleep had transformed them into something else entirely. Something darker. No one ever dared to speak of it again. But the legend of the hibernating elderly lives on, a chilling reminder of the secrets hidden in the icy hills of Vermont, waiting to emerge once more. Let me know in the comments below which story you found the most terrifying and why. If you enjoyed these chilling tales, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to stay updated on all our upcoming spine-tingling videos, and don't forget to share with friends who dare to hear these dark legends. Stay tuned, because next time we'll dive even deeper into the unknown. Until then, keep your lights on, and your doors locked. Thanks for watching.